How deep must a leader fall before even her own neighbors begin to act as if she no longer exists? It's a chilling question. And it hung heavily over the southern African region this week, like a slow-moving storm no one wanted to name. Picture the scene: a high-level SADC summit. Leaders from across southern Africa joining a virtual meeting: Zimbabwe, Malawi, Eswatini, South Africa, each represented by a familiar face, each acknowledged with polite diplomatic warmth. Cameras switched on, national flags arranged neatly behind every speaker. A routine regional gathering. Except for one thing. A silence. A silence so deliberate, so sharp that it cut straight through the formal smiles and rehearsed speeches. Tanzania, one of the region's largest and most strategic nations, was simply not mentioned, not congratulated, not acknowledged, not even recognized as present, though its vice president sat quietly through the entire session waiting for a nod that never came. And all of this unfolded just days after the country's disputed elections left thousands feared dead in the streets. For many watching, especially older Africans who lived through earlier eras of political upheaval, this wasn't just a diplomatic oversight. It felt like an unmistakable message from the region's most influential leaders to President Samia Suluhu Hassan. We see what is happening and we refuse to pretend everything is normal. So the real question becomes, what does it mean when a nation is not condemned, not criticized, but erased? And why now, at a moment when Tanzania is facing some of the darkest accusations in its recent history? If you care about stability in East Africa, if you believe that silence can speak louder than any speech, and if you want to understand why this moment could shape the region's future for years to come, stay with me. And if you believe the truth matters more than the headlines, please subscribe. Your engagement helps bring stories like this, stories too important to ignore, into the light. The SADC summit that unfolded this week was supposed to be routine, an orderly, almost ceremonial gathering meant to manage a delicate political transition after Madagascar's leadership collapsed into crisis. It was a virtual meeting, yet it carried the weight of a region trying to steady itself through escalating storms. Leaders from Zimbabwe, Malawi, Eswatini, and South Africa joined the call, each introduced with formal respect and diplomatic ease. Their titles were recited carefully as tradition demands, their years of service wrapped in layers of protocol. But beneath the formalities, something was off, something unusual, something quietly historic. Because while every nation received its moment of acknowledgement, one country, Tanzania, was treated as though it had simply vanished from the map. The meeting opened with South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa delivering remarks that set the tone for the rest of the session. He began by congratulating Malawi's President Peter Mutharika on his election victory, expressing hope for progress and stability. He then offered condolences to the people of Madagascar, recognizing the tragedy and unrest that had shaken the island nation. His words were measured, deliberate, and infused with the diplomatic balance expected of a regional leader. Yet the pattern of acknowledgement praise for Malawi's sympathy for Madagascar was broken abruptly when it came to Tanzania, despite being one of the region's most populous nations. Despite having its vice president, Emmanuel Nchimbi, seated quietly on the call, despite experiencing a violent post-election crisis that reportedly claimed thousands of lives, President Ramaphosa never mentioned Tanzania, not once, not even in passing. He spoke of peace. He spoke of regional solidarity. He spoke of the duty to protect democracy and stability, but he did not speak of Tanzania. For seasoned observers, the omission was unmistakable. In African regional politics, silence is rarely an accident. It is often a statement, one louder, sharper, and more consequential than any direct rebuke. And in this case, it was a silence that revealed the widening gap between Tanzania and its regional neighbors. Throughout the meeting, Ramaphosa emphasized the importance of unity within SADC. He framed the region's challenges as formidable but not insurmountable, stressing that decisive action was needed to stabilize troubled states and safeguard long-term prosperity. His tone was sober, almost fatherly, urging fellow leaders to look beyond short-term politics toward a shared regional future. But as he spoke, camera angles captured the stillness of Vice President Nchimbi. He sat listening, waiting, perhaps hoping for even a brief reference to his country, some acknowledgement that Tanzania's crisis mattered to the region, that the pain of its citizens was seen, that the legitimacy of its government had not simply evaporated, But the acknowledgement never came. Instead, the meeting progressed as though Tanzania were a minor footnote in a much larger narrative. And that is what made the moment so striking. Because Tanzania is not a minor country. It is not an insignificant player. It is one of East Africa's anchors, a nation whose political tremors can shake the stability of the entire region. So when Ramaphosa praised Malawi's election and mourned Madagascar's unrest, but said nothing about Tanzania's bloodshed, diplomats and analysts alike understood this was not neglect. This was a message. A message that Tanzania's disputed 98% victory could not be normalized. A message that the region's patience had limits. A message that SADC would not publicly endorse an election widely seen as drenched in violence. By the time Ramaphosa concluded the session, thanking ministers, acknowledging technical teams, and formally declaring the meeting open, the silence surrounding Tanzania had grown louder than any speech delivered that day. It marked the beginning of a diplomatic moment that would soon ripple far beyond the virtual room. If the silence during the summit was unsettling, what followed afterward pushed the moment into full political drama. Because once the cameras stopped rolling and the meeting came to an end, the public began doing what regional bodies so often fear. They started paying attention. Clips of the summit, especially the portion where Ramaphosa congratulated Malawi and expressed condolences to Madagascar, circulated rapidly across Twitter and Facebook. But the part people focused on wasn't anything Ramaphosa said. It was everything he didn't. The absence of Tanzania in his remarks became the centerpiece of online discussion. It was almost as if millions of people had collectively noticed the same missing sentence, and they weren't shy about calling it out. One user wrote, "I just listened to President Ramaphosa. He congratulated Malawi. He mentioned Madagascar, but he did not congratulate the Madam Dictator of Tanzania, who slaughtered thousands to stay in power." That silence speaks for us. The comment was blunt, emotional, and widely shared, capturing the anger and exhaustion many East Africans feel after witnessing repeated cycles of disputed elections and government crackdowns. Others questioned when Tanzania's escalating violence would finally be placed on the SADC agenda. Some demanded sanctions, some demanded investigations, and some simply wanted the suffering acknowledged. For many people, watching that single moment of silence from Ramaphosa was more powerful, more honest than any carefully written diplomatic statement could have been. They saw it not as a mistake, but as the region's first collective signal that something had gone terribly wrong in Tanzania. And then, under mounting scrutiny, SADC did something it rarely does. It backtracked. Hours after being criticized across social media, SADC issued an official statement that attempted to balance the optics, as one analyst put it. The statement expressed condolences to families in both Madagascar and Tanzania who lost loved ones during recent protests. It acknowledged the destruction of property and critical infrastructure in both countries. But the tone was unmistakably cautious. There was no mention of election fraud, no recognition of the massive civilian death toll, no acknowledgement of the accusations against the Tanzanian government. It read like a diplomatic bandage stretched over a deep wound. The public saw it immediately, the region's commentators saw it immediately, and international observers saw it too. The truth was simple. The second statement existed only because the first silence caused an uproar. Meanwhile, inside Tanzania's own delegation, the pressure mounted. Vice President Emmanuel Nchimbi, who had sat through the entire summit without hearing his nation's name, now found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to reassure the region. He insisted Tanzania was safe, that calm had been restored, that life had returned to normal. But in diplomacy, words matter only when they match reality. And reality painted a darker picture, because while Nchimbi spoke of stability, the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania issued one of its strongest warnings yet. The alert described a country where the security presence remained heavy, checkpoints continued to restrict movement, and foreign nationals were being stopped, questioned, or even detained temporarily. It was a direct contradiction of Tanzania's official narrative, a contradiction that widened the trust gap between the government and the outside world. This clash between what Tanzania claimed and what the U.S. reported became the breaking point of the entire story. It reinforced the notion that Ramaphosa's silence had been intentional, not accidental. It hinted that SADC leaders, too, doubted the restored calm narrative. And it underscored the regional fear that Tanzania was entering a dangerous phase, one where political legitimacy erodes faster than a government can rebuild it. In that sense, the summit's silence was not just an omission, it was the climax of a regional reckoning, a moment when diplomatic politeness gave way to unspoken truth, a moment when online voices amplified what leaders could not say openly, a moment that revealed Tanzania's growing isolation, one tweet, one speech, and one silence at a time. When a nation reaches the point where even its closest neighbors hesitate to speak its name, ordinary citizens feel the consequences long before politicians do. And in Tanzania, those consequences are unfolding with a quiet, painful clarity. For many families, the days following the disputed election have been marked by fear, confusion, and the constant question of whether their loved ones will make it home safely. Entire neighborhoods live with the echoes of the violence that swept across the country. Parents still whisper stories of gunfire heard at night. University students recount checkpoints that seem to appear without warning. Shop owners speak of days when streets were too tense for commerce, when the air itself felt heavy with uncertainty. These are not abstract political talking points. They are daily realities. Even as Tanzania's leadership tries to project an image of normalcy, the people know better. The silence from SADC did not just sting the government, it validated what citizens have been saying for weeks: things are not okay. The stability officials speak of is fragile, uneven, and experienced only by those far from the sites of protest and repression. Politically, the fallout is becoming just as significant. Tanzania, once viewed as a calm and predictable regional actor, now faces a steep decline in trust from its neighbors. Cooperation on joint security programs critical in a region battling insurgencies and cross-border crime becomes difficult when one member state is seen as politically unstable. Other nations worry that Tanzania's internal turmoil may soon spill outward, affecting trade routes, migratory patterns, or even fueling extremist networks seeking to exploit weakened institutions. Inside the country, the legitimacy of the government has taken a hit that no official speech can repair. A disputed 98% victory already raised eyebrows across the continent. But the subsequent violence and now the international reactions have deepened the crisis. When citizens see their government ignored in regional forums, it reinforces the belief that their concerns have merit, that their suffering is recognized beyond their borders. This erosion of trust works like a slow-moving fracture through society. Civil servants begin questioning the longevity of the current administration. Opposition groups gain renewed courage, interpreting SADC's silence as regional sympathy for their cause. Youth movements, already frustrated by unemployment and political exclusion, see new justification for organizing both online and on the streets. All of this fuels a volatile political climate, one that no amount of government reassurance can fully control. And then there is the broader symbolic consequence, something older viewers of this channel may recognize from other moments in African political history. When a state becomes isolated, it often turns inward. It tightens its grip. It becomes more suspicious of dissent. Ordinary citizens become the first casualties of that defensive posture. Checkpoints multiply. Arrests increase. The line between public safety and political control blurs. The U.S. Embassy's warnings only intensify this atmosphere. When a global power advises its citizens to remain cautious, it signals to Tanzanians that the crisis is not just political maneuvering, it is real, visible, and concerning enough for foreign governments to speak plainly. For a nation that once prided itself on peace and unity, this is a painful shift. The Tanzania many remember, stable, soft-spoken, a symbol of regional calm, now stands at a crossroads where its internal wounds and external isolation intersect. And the most tragic part, it is the citizens, not the politicians, who carry the heaviest weight of that intersection. From the outside looking in, the crisis in Tanzania is not just an internal political matter. For major world powers, especially the United States, it represents a potential fault line in a region where stability has always been fragile and where instability spreads quickly across borders. To understand Washington's reaction, you must understand the long-standing U.S. posture in East Africa. For decades, America has treated the region as a strategic corridor, a corridor for counterterrorism operations, humanitarian logistics, diplomatic engagement, and economic partnerships. Tanzania, with its long coastline, deep water ports, and relative calm, once served as a quiet anchor in that corridor. But today, that anchor is shaking. The U.S. Embassy's security warnings were not issued lightly. American diplomats understand the weight of their words, especially in a region where governments often try to downplay unrest. When the embassy warns that movement is restricted, that foreigners may be questioned or detained, it signals that U.S. intelligence sees a situation more dangerous than what Tanzania's leaders are willing to admit. It is rare for Washington to contradict a government so directly. Yet, that is exactly what happened, and this carries ramifications far beyond tourism. Foreign investors, particularly American companies in energy, logistics, and telecommunications, watch these signals closely. Most have long memories of political shocks in other African nations that cost them billions. A U.S. alert can freeze investment overnight, slow down infrastructure partnerships, and even cause multinational organizations to quietly reroute their regional operations. But America isn't the only global power watching. In Europe, diplomats are reviewing SADC's unusual silence with a raised eyebrow. The European Union has invested heavily in East African stability programs. A crisis in Tanzania threatens years of development cooperation and regional integration. Brussels is cautious, but if violence continues, it could place Tanzania under closer scrutiny, perhaps even triggering debates around sanctions or election investigations. In Beijing, the tone is different, but no less strategic. China has poured billions into Tanzania railways, ports, industrial zones. While Washington responds through warnings and public advisories, Beijing often responds quietly behind closed doors, assessing whether a partner is losing legitimacy or simply enduring a temporary storm. If Beijing senses weakness, it may tighten economic leverage or negotiate new terms that favor Chinese strategic interests. Across the African continent, Tanzania's isolation is being contrasted with the rise of other regional figures. Many African news outlets now draw comparisons, sometimes subtly, sometimes openly, between Tanzania's instability and the renewed assertiveness of countries like Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré. It is a reminder that while one nation falters, another may rise to claim the narrative of African sovereignty and stability. For U.S. policymakers, this raises deeper questions. Will Tanzania become another flashpoint requiring intervention? Will American influence shrink as other actors move in? Or will this crisis push Washington to reassess its partnerships in East Africa? One thing is certain. When a country begins losing the confidence of its neighbors and the warnings from America grow louder, the world starts rewriting its expectations. And Tanzania is now entering that phase where the story is no longer about a disputed election, but about a nation standing at the edge of a geopolitical shift. In the end, what happened at the SADC summit was more than a diplomatic oversight. It was a warning shot. Because when a nation is not condemned, when it is not praised, when it is simply ignored, that is the region's way of signaling that something deeper is broken. Tanzania now stands at a crossroads that older generations across Africa know all too well. Moments like these have appeared before in the continent's political history, moments when leaders believed they could control the narrative even as reality slipped beyond their grasp. And every time the silence of neighbors was the final sign that a reckoning was near. The danger, however, is not only political, it is human. When government legitimacy weakens, ordinary families become the ones who feel the ground shift beneath their feet. They become the ones navigating checkpoints, questioning news reports, and wondering whether tomorrow will be safer than today. And in a region already stressed by economic hardship, migration pressures, and security threats, Tanzania's instability does not stay within its borders. It spreads quietly, invisibly through trade routes, refugee flows, and regional alliances. This is why the silence of SADC matters. This is why the warnings from Washington matter, and this is why the rest of the world is watching. Because if Tanzania continues down this path, it won't just be a domestic crisis. It will reshape the geopolitical balance of East Africa at a moment when new leadership models, some embraced by citizens, some resisted by old power structures, are rising across the continent. And here is where the conversation widens. Across Africa news platforms, there is growing debate about what type of leadership the continent needs in this new era. Some point to countries like Burkina Faso, where President Ibrahim Traoré has tried to redefine stability through sovereignty, accountability, and a break from outside influence. Others argue that Tanzania's crisis is a reminder of how quickly democracies can erode when governments stop listening to their people. These contrasting stories, one of isolation, one of renewal, may well shape Africa's next political chapter. So now the question is yours. Do you believe regional bodies like SADC did enough? Do you think Tanzania's government can regain the trust of its people and its neighbors? And what kind of leadership do you believe Africa needs in moments like this? If you feel these stories matter, if you believe ordinary people deserve to know the truth behind the headlines, then please share this video so more voices can join the conversation. And subscribe if you believe deeply that truth is far more important than the narratives powerful people want us to accept.